So I want to welcome you all to Science Unwrapped. How many of you have been to Science Unwrapped before? Lots of people. Anyone new? Someone who's never been to Science Unwrapped before? Awesome. So I'll tell you first just a little bit about how Science Unwrapped works, and then I'll introduce our speaker for tonight. So, shh. There's still some seats down in the front, in the middle off to the sides, over there in the middle. So we'll be in this room for about an hour until 8 o'clock. And during that time, our speaker will talk about sharks for 40 to 45 minutes. And then when she stops talking, we'll still have time for you to ask questions for 10 or 15 minutes. So when she's done talking, we're not quite done yet. Hang on, and you'll have a chance to talk with her. At 8 o'clock, we'll adjourn in here and send you all out into the halls, and there'll be lots of cool science-y things to look at and do and play with and talk about. So don't miss that. And if you still have questions left for the speaker, you can also just stay in the room and come down and ask her directly when we're done with the general Q&A. This is the last of our fall series of talks on ecology. And we did those in observation of the 50th anniversary of the Ecology Center, so we had 3 of our great USU ecologists talk, and we won't be back again until January, and at that time we'll have a series on science and art, so speakers observing USU's Year of the Arts. And thank you to the College of Science for sponsoring these and for recognizing so many great programs here. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Trisha Atwood, who is an ecologist in the Department of Watershed Sciences and the Ecology Center. Trisha grew up not very far from here in a rural area in a dry part of Wyoming, and her parents still live there near Evanston. And somehow she ended up leaving and spending, 15 years now traveling around the world studying really wet places, including oceans and rivers and estuaries and streams. So I asked her how she came to science, and I want to read you what she told me because it was a pretty cool story. So Trisha said, "My fascination with the ocean and becoming a scientist started when I was 7 years old. I'd caught a nasty flu that kept me out of school for over a week, and in an attempt to keep me somewhat educated while I recovered, my mom bought me a bunch of David Attenborough and Jacques Cousteau documentary films, and she read me 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So like the quote from Jacques Cousteau, the sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonder forever. I became obsessed with becoming a marine biologist, and that led me to the University of Hawaii at Hilo, where I received a BA in marine science, and then studied the ecology of estuaries, where rivers meet the oceans, for a Master of Science. So Trisha then continued moving around the world. She came back to North America, but went to Canada and studied streams, the organisms that live in streams and how they affect stream ecosystems. And then moved on to Australia, where she worked with CSIRO, the government science research agency there, and began her studies of oceans around Australia. And I think that's where she first encountered sharks in a big way. Is that right?
Hawaii. There's some sharky moments in Hawaii.
Yeah, yeah. And then about 3 years ago, she moved here to Utah and joined our faculty, and now she takes students to some of the wonderful places she'll talk about today. Her talk topic tonight is sharks, guardians of our oceans.
All right, great. Thanks, Nancy. Okay. Well, I am super excited to see that so many of you guys are interested in learning about sharks, because I truly love sharks. But before I kind of get into my talk, I want to kind of see what your guys' feelings about sharks are. So how many people here, when you think about a shark, think about kind of a goofy, fun-loving animal that you're not afraid of whatsoever? Something, kind of like this. Anybody? Anybody totally not afraid of sharks? Okay, a few of you out there, all right? But see, most people don't think of sharks as these fun-loving creatures, right? At best, most people are probably imagining something like this tiger shark up here, right? Something a little bit scary, kind of untrustworthy, right? Makes you a little nervous. And at worst, people are thinking bloodthirsty murder beasts, right? The kind of things that your nightmares are I'm not entirely sure what's going on with the lights, but but you know, most people are probably thinking about sharks as kind of really evil type things. Okay? Now, these next couple of slides are going to be for the people who are thinking that these guys are bloodthirsty murder beasts, all right? And those of you who are totally not scared of sharks whatsoever, you can kind of just look at the pretty pictures for the next couple of slides. But you guys who are afraid of sharks, I'm going to throw some statistics at you. And I'm going to see if I can change your mind about sharks in 3 slides. Ready? Okay, my first statistic. Yeah. Wow. No, this isn't the statistics. All right. So my first statistics to show you guys is this one. This is your chances of being attacked and killed by a shark, right? Extremely low. Your chance of being attacked and killed by a shark, this is everyone, not just Utahns, everyone's chance of being attacked and killed by a shark is about 1 in 37 million, right? That's like lottery winning low, okay? So that probably doesn't really help you. How about this statistic? You have a 5 times greater chance of being killed by a cow than you do a shark. So on average, cows kill about 22 people a year, right? Sharks across the entire world only kill about 5 people a year, right? What's scarier than a cow? A car. All right? You have a way higher chance of being killed in a car wreck than you ever do from a shark, a 56 times greater. And you know what? This number, 280, that's just for Utah, right? That's not the United States or even global, okay? So your chance of actually having a really bad negative interaction with a shark is really, really low. All right. Now, did I change anyone's mind? Hey, is anybody who was afraid of sharks entirely cured by those statistics? Right? You're looking at this picture and you're going, there's no problem there. Better yet, if you were this guy in the kayak, would you be thinking, there's nothing to worry about. I have a 1 in 37 million chance that this shark is actually going to attack me and kill me, right? Anyone? Anyone changed completely, right? Maybe a few of you, but most of us know, right? Those statistics aren't going to change our minds, right? And one, that's because nobody cares about statistics, okay? But also, people's viewpoints about things like sharks are seated in a deep fear, right? And we may not even understand where that fear is coming from, right? So how many people here, with a raise of hands, are really, really scared of sharks? Okay? Not as many as I thought, okay? But with those of you who have your hands up and are scared of sharks, even a little bit, all right? How many of you have actually had a negative interaction with a real shark that has created those fears? Right? Virtually no one, right? We know that these negative interactions with sharks are very, very low, but yet people are still really scared of sharks. Okay? And the reason why is because when we assess risk, when we think about risk, whether that be riding our bikes, getting in a car, walking up to a cow, or getting in the ocean, our bodies, our minds start to pull information from past experiences, right? And if those experiences have generally been positive, then we don't really elicit a fear of it. if those experiences have been negative, we become afraid of things, okay? But what happens when you've had no real experiences with something? Your mind starts to pull information from other experiences that you may have. This may be watching Shark Week on Discovery Channel, or reading the book Jaws, right? Or reading a newspaper article. And so the thing with sharks is that in the media, sharks are often portrayed really negatively. They're portrayed as super evil organisms, okay? So that's the experience that your mind starts to pull together when we talk about sharks, is that they're evil because news and books like Jaws and movies like Jaws tell you that they're evil, right? But that's really unfortunate, okay? Because we know, right? You guys have now seen the statistics. The chances of getting eaten by a shark are actually incredibly low, right? But you hate them. You don't like them or you're afraid of them. And that impacts our ability to conserve them as different species, okay? Now, here's the big problem with that. The reason why we want to protect sharks is because scientists are finding out that sharks are really, really super important for the health of our oceans, okay? So we need to change the conversation about sharks. We need people to think about sharks as super cool, really interesting heroes of our oceans, right? And we need to get those negative pictures, Sharknado, out of our minds, okay? So let's talk a little bit about why sharks are so important for ocean health. And that reason is because they are extremely good predators. These guys are awesome at eating other organisms. Now, most of us probably think about sharks as large predators, okay? Things that eat big fish or seals or something like that, because that's largely what we've seen on documentaries or what we've read about. But in reality, sharks are an incredibly diverse group of fishes, all right? In fact, we have over 400 species of sharks living today. And those range from our tiniest shark, the 8-inch dwarf lantern shark, which is just about as big as your hand, all the way up to the biggest fish in the sea, which is our 40-foot whale shark, right? So that huge range in size of sharks means that these organisms play critical roles across a lot of different trophic levels. And we'll talk about trophic levels in a minute, right? But that diversity in size is huge. And so they affect their ecosystems in very diverse and huge ways. Now, if predation is the main way that sharks influence their ecosystems, then scientists have to know what they're eating, right? But it can be really tricky for a scientist to actually figure out what a shark is eating. A lot of the tricks that we scientists use to discover what animals are eating on land don't necessarily work very well in the ocean. So this picture right here is of a grizzly bear eating a fish, right? So we have tons of pictures of this, and tons of people have observed this. So we can take those observations and say, well, we know grizzly bears eat fish. But observing a shark actually preying on something can be really, really difficult for some species, right? I once did a study on the Great Barrier Reef where we were filming lemon sharks and blacktip reef sharks. And although we had tons of them come into our filming, in 1,000 hours of videoing, we didn't see a single predation event, which means that they're actually quite rare. The other thing is that a lot of species of sharks are actually quite cryptic, which means they're hidden or we can't find them very easily, right? So for example, this guy right here, this is a megamouth shark, right? This guy is a truly huge animal. They are 2,700 pounds, and they're 17 feet long. But you know what? We only discovered this species of shark 40 years ago. And since then, there's only been 100 sightings of them. So this guy is really, really hard to find in nature, let alone actually seeing him eat something. The other way that scientists on land understand what things are eating is to look at their poop. Okay? So this is a bear poop right here. And who wants to get what this bear has been eating recently? Blueberries, right? You can see it. It's right there. They eat blueberries. Okay? But collecting shark poop, not very easy. Okay? Unlike that bear, right? You can be walking along the trail and just suddenly come along bear poop. The bear doesn't actually have to be there. Okay? But for a shark, you actually have to witness it pooping. And sharks like their privacy just like we do. Okay? And chances are you're not going to be able to find their poop. And if you're not right there when it happens, it's just going to float away and you'll never find it. So collecting shark poop is hard. So how do we understand what sharks are eating? How do scientists figure it out? Well, our best clues is to actually look at their jaws and their teeth, right? So here are a couple of shark jaws. Now, these first set of jaws that I'm going to show you belong to a whale shark. Now, what's missing from these jaws? Teeth. There are no teeth, right? And it's not because this was just a super old whale shark and his teeth fell out, right? This whale shark never had teeth. And the reason why is because these guys, whale sharks, basking sharks, and our elusive friend the megamouth, eat zooplankton. Okay, what are zooplankton? Zooplankton are these tiny marine animals that are actually no bigger than my thumb. Okay, so very cool. How do they collect this without having any teeth? Well, let's hope that this video works. All right, so this is a video of a basking shark eating. Okay, looks really scary. Whoa. And all he's doing is he's swimming along with his mouth wide open, just collecting all that zooplankton, right? And if you're the snorkeler, you might be a little bit scared, but this basking shark is not interested in the person doing the videoing whatsoever. All he's interested in is just keeping his mouth open and having all that yummy zooplankton go inside his mouth and right down to his tummy. Okay? So what's really impressive about these planktivorous sharks, right, these three species of planktivorous sharks, is that they are the three biggest sharks currently in existence. Okay? The whale shark is 40 feet long and weighs 41,000 pounds. It's a truly beast of an animal. And he is the biggest shark and also the biggest fish in the sea, right? Our next biggest shark is this guy over here, the basking shark, right? He's 26 feet and weighs 4,900 pounds. And then finally, we have our smallest of the really big sharks, the megamouth, which is 17 feet and weighs 2,700 pounds. Now, what's really cool is that these sharks are huge, but remember that they're able to survive off of eating something just as big as my thumb, which means that they have to be really, really good predators of zooplankton. They have to be excellent in order to support that level of body mass. Sometimes we don't actually see the jaws of the organism necessarily, but we see remnants of what they've bitten. Okay? And so right here is a shark bite. Okay? See how circular it is? Right? So animals like dolphins and whales and sometimes big fish like tuna show up with these weird circular patterns on them. And what scientists had to do is figure out what caused them. And so like a puzzle, they started matching these scars with different jaws. And what they found is that these scars were caused by this little dude right here. Right? This guy is called a cookie-cutter shark, right? And you can almost understand why based off of its circular mouth. But these guys are only about 22 inches long, right? And they take those circular notches out of organisms. Now, cookie-cutter sharks are really interesting because their intent is not to kill their prey. All they want to do is take a little nibble out of it. So these guys are actually acting more like parasites than they are the kind of big, scary predators that we think about sharks as being. But the other really cool thing about cookie-cutter sharks is these guys are super clever predators. How do they actually get things like dolphins and whales and tuna to get close enough to them that they could actually take those kind of circular patterns out, right? Why would an animal let them do that? Well, they're clever. What these guys have, although they're only tiny, 22 inches or so, they have bioluminescence on their stomach. Bioluminescence is a type of bacteria that creates lights, right? And so what these cookie-cutter sharks do is they swim to the surface of the water at night, they light up their stomachs in a pattern that makes them look like a really tasty little fish, and then they wait for a dolphin or some other predator to come along. Once that predator starts getting close, and it's thinking, I'm gonna get a tasty meal, all of a sudden that cookie-cutter shark moves with almost lightning-like speed, attaches itself to the animal, twists ferociously, and takes out a chunk of that flesh, and it swims away, right? And the other animal's sitting there going, where did my meal go? Right? He had no idea what was coming for him. Incredibly, incredibly tricky little predators. Now, these jaws over here belong to my favorite little shark. These guys are called Port Jackson sharks, right? And if you look at their jaws, you can see in their teeth, you can see that they don't have big pointy teeth. They have these kind of flattened bulbousy plates, right? Can anybody guess what these guys might be eating? Plants. Maybe plants, that's a good one. Kind of like a cow, you're thinking like a cow? What was that? I think I heard it. Crabs, right? These bulbousy plates are used for crushing shells, okay? So these guys actually eat little tiny benthic things like crabs and lobsters, and sometimes they eat the eggs of other sharks. So this really cool spiraled thing right here, this is an egg of a shark that's called a mermaid purse. So these guys are interesting little predators that feed on little things on the bottom. Now, the last set of jaws I'm going to show you are these ones, right? And these are the ones that we're probably all familiar with. And I actually have a pair of somewhat similar jaws up here. Now, if you look at these jaws, and especially their teeth, what you notice is that the teeth are incredibly pointy, and they're serrated like a knife, okay? And these teeth belong to big meat eaters, right? These teeth belong to our top predators in the ocean. Those teeth there are meant to go through thick flesh and bone, right? And so on the left, those teeth and those jaws belong to our friend, the great white shark. All right, and these guys swim in cold waters. The ones on the right belong to a tiger shark. And these guys like to swim in warmer waters. And the ones that I have up here that you guys can look at later, but I would ask you not to touch because the jaws or the teeth are extremely sharp, belong to bull sharks, which also like to swim in warm waters. Okay? So these guys are our top predators in the ocean. And we call them top predators because once they get to their maximum adult size, nothing in the ocean can eat them, or at least so we thought. Recently, there have been some observations of killer whales or orcas actually attacking very large great white sharks and eating them. So those new observations are starting to change the way we think about great whites and top predators in the ocean. Now, from all those different things that I showed you, all those different jaws, and there are tons more different types of sharks out there. We can see that sharks fit into a lot of different roles in the ocean. Everything from our parasitic cookie-cutter sharks all the way up to our mega predators that are eating things like marine mammals and large fish. Now, this huge diversity of sharks means that they can influence marine ecosystems in a lot of different ways, all the way from near the bottom of the food chain all the way to the top. So what happens if these guys go extinct? Well, scientists have been figuring out that sharks are really, really important to the ocean because they affect ecosystem services. Now, ecosystem services are the benefits that humans get from a natural ecosystem. So we have several examples of how sharks are benefiting humans. And one of those examples is that we know that they help protect economically important fisheries species. And this example actually comes from the east coast of the United States. So this dude right here is a scallop, right? People love to eat scallops. They're really, really tasty little shellfish, okay? But scallops are also a really important fishery on the east coast of the United States. That fishery supports thousands of jobs for people, and in 2015, it brought in $430 million in revenue to the United States, right? Just this one scallop fishery. Now, that number seems really large, but actually it should be a lot better, right? So this figure right here basically shows time on the bottom and the amount of scallops that we were pulling out of the ocean over those times. And what I really want you guys to focus on is that right here around 1985, all of a sudden the amount of scallops that we were pulling out of the East Coast drops a lot. It completely crashes. And that's not because we suddenly decided to take fewer scallops out of the ocean. This happened because we couldn't find any more scallops. Now, this is a really important fishery, so you can bet that the government and people on the East Coast spent a lot of money trying to figure out what happened to the scallops, right? And in 2007, a group of researchers published a paper that suggested that the decline in scallops was actually related to us overfishing shark populations on the East Coast. So how do sharks help protect the scallop fishery? Through predation, right? And so large sharks, like this hammerhead right here, eat kind of medium-sized organisms like this cow-nosed ray. And this cow-nosed ray loves scallops. It's one of its favorite foods, okay? Now, what happened, and this graph will show here, basically this is the percentage that populations declined of different types of sharks, right? And we can see that we've lost 79% of our great whites. We've lost 80% of our threshers. And if you continue across this, we see that for our really large sharks, almost all of them are declining by over 90%. Now, this is since 1970, okay? So shark populations have been declining a lot since 1970. Now, what's interesting about the year 1970 is this. In 1974, the best-selling novel Jaws came out. And in 1975, the summer blockbuster Jaws the movie came out. Now, there's a lot of speculation that this book and that movie actually legitimized shark fishing in America and across other places as well. What this movie and what this book did is it caused people to panic and feel fear about sharks, even though they had never really had an interaction with sharks, right? And so people started to not care that we were removing them from the ocean. Not only that, we started to actively remove them to try to protect more people. Now, we'll never actually know whether or not Jaws, the book and the movie, actually caused the great decline in sharks. But the author of the book Jaws, Peter Benchley, actually felt so horrible about what was happening to sharks after that movie went out, is that he actually said that he regretted writing the book and he became a huge advocate for ocean conservation and especially shark conservation, right? So he actually felt really bad about what started happening to sharks and the fear he created in people about sharks. But if we go back to our example about this scallop fishery, right? So we have this huge decline in sharks that started around the 70s. And so we have smaller, much smaller shark populations. And that means that our cow-nosed rays can just swim along and grow, and they don't have to be afraid about being eaten at all. And so their populations started to explode, right? And when these populations started to explode, they needed to eat something. And their favorite food, the scallop, took the hit. So these guys started eating more and more scallops until suddenly the fishery crashed. And in some places like North Carolina, the scallop fishery entirely shut down, right? So sharks actually were helping to protect this really viable and important fishery in the United States. Now, that's not the only case that we have where sharks have been shown to be really, really important for ecosystems or marine ecosystems. We also know that sharks help protect seagrass habitat. Now, seagrass is a really important habitat for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Seagrass, if you guys don't know what seagrass is, it looks like a lawn of really tall grass in the ocean, right? And what this really tall grass in the ocean does is it protects our coasts from storms. So this grass kind of is sitting there, right? And as the waves are coming through, it causes those waves to reduce in their intensity, and it causes less damage on the coast when it's there. The other thing seagrass ecosystems do is they act as a nursery ground for a lot of important fisheries, right? So a lot of those fish that we really like to consume, the juveniles of those actually grow up in seagrass. Seagrass also helps improve water quality. And so those long blades, they're sitting there filtering out all the junk and the stuff that we don't really want to see in the ocean. And that makes our beaches cleaner and the water clearer. Okay? The other thing is that seagrass actually are a really important food source for a lot of species that people think are really cool, like dugongs and sea turtles. And then finally, because those seagrasses are a huge mass of plants, and plants are photosynthesizing and taking up CO2, they're also helping with climate change. So I'm going to go back to this graph, and I want you guys to focus on this species of shark right here, tiger sharks. Okay? So these guys have dropped 97% since the 70s. And this is really important because a tiger shark's favorite meal is a sea turtle, okay? Especially green sea turtles like this little dude right here. Now, I know what most of you guys are thinking. You're thinking, oh, but I don't really want them to eat sea turtles. Sea turtles are super cute, right? And that's true. Sea turtles are really, really cute. But if we have a lot of sea turtles, these guys can actually do a lot of damage to seagrass. And we've been seeing that happen as shark populations have declined and turtle populations are growing because we're protecting turtles, right? And so in places like the Caribbean, in Indonesia, and in the Florida Keys, we're seeing that turtles are killing off seagrass because they're overeating it. And so scientists have shown this by basically going out and they've put a cage over the top of seagrass. So this was entirely caged. And what that cage does is it prevents the sea turtles from being able to eat the seagrass. And then they've left this other area completely open so sea turtles can just go along and do their normal thing. About a year later or two, the scientists take the cage off, and you see this, right? You can see that when the sea turtles can't forage, or they can't eat, the seagrass grows long and beautiful and wonderful, right? But if you look just to the other side, they've done some real damage to the seagrass, lots of bare spots in there. So by preying on turtles, by eating turtles, and keeping their populations low, sharks are actually protecting our seagrass along with all those other benefits that we were getting. Right? And we've seen that they do something very similar in coral reefs. So people have gone to different coral reefs across the world in places where shark populations are still pretty high and pretty good, as well as places where we've really overfished sharks. And you can clearly see the differences in those coral reefs, right? Ones with high abundances of sharks, these reefs look healthy. They have tons of little fish in the background, and they're going good, right? But reefs that have lost a lot of their big predators, sharks and other fish as well, look like this. They're covered with algae, right? And they're dying. So again, through predation, sharks are protecting coral reef ecosystems and all the wonderful things that coral reefs do for us. Now, my last example is this really cool one. Okay? And this is pretty new stuff. These scientific papers just came out this year. We're finding that sharks help reduce the spread of wildlife diseases. Okay? This poor little turtle right here has been affected by a virus called fibropapilloma, right? And fibropapilloma is like herpes for sea turtles, okay? And so what that does is it causes them to grow these tumors all over their body. Now, scientists don't really understand a lot about how this virus is spread, but they're pretty sure that the infection goes from an infected turtle with tumors that then touches a healthy turtle, and then that healthy turtle gets tumors as well. And that once healthy turtle touches another turtle, and that one gets infected as well. Right? Now, these tumors don't kill the turtle. They're not cancerous. But what they do is they grow on the eyes, on the necks, and behind the fins or flippers. Right? And so what happens is the turtle becomes blind, and it's hard for it to move very fast. Now, what these recent studies have shown is that sharks actually like to eat these infected turtles. They prefer them. They prefer infected or diseased turtles to healthy young ones. And the reason for that is probably because these guys don't move very fast, and they can't see the shark coming. So they're a nice, easy little snack for the shark to get. Now, the cool thing is that this virus only affects sea turtles. So if a shark eats an infected turtle, it doesn't get the disease. It just simply takes the turtle out of the equation. So now that turtle is gone, and it can't infect anyone else ever again, right? So by preying on these infected sea turtles, sharks are actually controlling the disease a bit. Okay? So that's some really cool new stuff that's come out. So how can we save sharks, right? That's hopefully why you guys are all here. Okay? How can we save them? Well, to save them, we have to understand what's happening to them and why. What's causing shark declines is one simple reason. It's us. Okay? It's not climate change. Right? It's not ocean acidification. It is simply that we are overfishing sharks out of the ocean. Okay? And we're doing this for a lot of different reasons. One of those reasons is for food. Okay? People eat shark. Right? A lot of you guys have probably heard about this. This is shark fin soup. Right? It's a delicacy in a lot of parts of Asia. And there's been a lot of people saying, oh, we should really put pressure on these Asian communities to stop finning sharks. And that's true, because finning takes tons of sharks out of the ocean. But a lot of us can get off our really high horse, because chances are, if you've eaten fish and chips, you've eaten shark too. Because fish and chips, oftentimes, unless they say cod or something like that specifically, come from this little dude right here, a wobbegong. Okay? And a wobbegong is a shark. Right? This guy is a benthic feeder. He lays on the ground, which is why he kind of has that molted color, which is to camouflage himself. And he uses these little feelers around to basically stir up fish and little animals that he can then eat. But the problem with wobbegong is they're really easy to catch. And we have an overabundance of them, or at least people thought we had an overabundance for them. And so they end up in fish and chips and things like imitation crab meat all over the world, including in the United States. Right? So chances are, if you've eaten nondescript fish and chips, you've probably eaten wobbegong. Okay? We also persecute sharks, right? What happens when a shark kills a person or attacks a person on the beach is panic rises, right? And local legislators try to do something about that panic. And what they often do is create a shark coal, right? And a shark coal basically is to go out and drop these long lines or these drum lines or shark nets, which sole intention is to catch large sharks and to kill them, right? And these guys are doing it because they're hoping to protect people, right? And we kill hundreds of thousands of sharks with drum lines and shark nets every year in the United States, in Australia, across the world. Okay? We also like to fish for sharks, okay? Sport fishing. These make for great photos, right? People want to show that they got a big animal, oftentimes. And so a lot of people fish for sharks recreationally. But here's the kicker. Eating them for food, shark fishing, or for persecution and drumlining, those are all ways that we are specifically targeting sharks, right? We are looking for sharks, we kill them for those various reasons. But the number one killer of sharks out there is actually bycatch, okay? And what bycatch is when we're actually fishing for another species, right? And we accidentally catch something else, right? So if we're fishing for something like flounder or flatfish like we were doing here, what happened is that they're dragging this big net close to the ocean floor and basically catching anything in its way, including this little shark dude right here, right? And it dies. And this isn't just sharks that this is happening to. It happens to sea turtles, it happens to dolphins, and all kinds of other animals. The thing is that we can do something about bycatch. If we put pressure on fishing industries to change their type of gear, we can actually remove or reduce the types of bycatch that we get. But the problem is that people aren't putting pressure on fisheries. And the reason why is because we like our fish prices to stay cheap. And if they have to change their gear, it means they have to work harder and longer hours, and that means prices get jacked up for you consumers, right? But we can change this. So all of those things, all of those reasons, the persecution, the sport fishing, the bycatch, we remove over 100 million sharks every year from the ocean, right? That's a huge number. That number actually made me feel ill when I first saw it. I had to go and check because I was like, surely we're not removing 100 million sharks a year, right? But we are. And not only that, the story gets worse for sharks. Because not only are we removing a very large number of them, but they also have some really interesting reproductive characteristics that make it really hard for their populations to recover once we've fished them. So a lot of our really large sharks actually give birth to live young, right? And that's really interesting because most of us know that fish, and a shark is a fish, lay eggs. But a lot of large sharks give birth to live young. And this has important consequences, because this means that the total number of young that a shark can produce at any one time, as well as over its entire life, is greatly reduced. And that makes recovering really difficult, right? Now, what's even more interesting, and so, most of our species of fish can lay hundreds to millions to thousands of eggs at a time, right? But our sharks that produce live young, they only give 2 or 10 pups every time, right? So that's a low number of reproduction, right? It's not millions of eggs like things like trout, right? The other really interesting thing is that some of our really large sharks actually have really, really long gestation periods. And what that means is that they have really long pregnancies, okay? And actually, our basking shark and our frilled shark are in the Guinness Book of World Records for the animal with the longest pregnancies. Does anyone want to guess how long these guys are pregnant for? 30 years. Ooh, you guys went really high. I heard 30 years. That would be excruciating. Oh, close. these guys stay pregnant for 3 years, okay? All right, so all the women out there, think about being pregnant for 3 years, right? Okay? But this is problematic, okay? This is problematic because if you're only giving birth to 2 to 10 pups every 3 years, or 4 years, because they probably need a period off, right? But if you're only giving birth to a few number, and we're removing hundreds to millions of these every year, they're never going to recover unless we stop fishing them, okay? So you guys are probably sitting in here thinking, well, why should you care, right? You live in Utah, you don't live anywhere near the coast, you've never knowingly probably eaten shark, and you don't sport fish for shark. Well, our perception about animals dictates policy, right? How we feel about animals tells our government how to react, right? And we have a really good past example of this, right? Human perception of whales and whaling was very different before 1960, okay? Before 1960, the US was heavily involved in whaling. We were removing about 500,000 whales every year. The public perception of whales were that they were a commodity, right? They were a good food resource, they produced oil, and people were thinking that they were very dangerous because people were influenced by books like Moby Dick, right? But something happened around 1960. People's perception of whales and dolphins started to change a lot, right? And that came because in 1960, television started to come out, and people were watching things like Jacques Cousteau's adventures, and they were seeing the marine world for the first time, and they were interacting with it. The other thing that happened was that SeaWorld had opened its doors, and it was showing different shows that involved things like seals and dolphins. The other thing that happened was that science actually showed that whales and dolphins are incredibly intelligent individuals. And as a result, people started to love whales and dolphins. And they started to think about them as incredibly interesting, incredibly cool, and endangered animals. So in 1986, the International Commission on Whaling actually decided, and several countries decided that they were going to stop whaling, right? So the US banned whaling in 1986. And that in part was because whale populations were starting to crash, but also in part because people's perceptions of whales were changing. Now, the intention of the commission was always to try to bring whale populations back up so we could fish them again. But a lot of people say that if they ever tried to do that in the United States right now, because people love whales so much, they would have a really heck of a time doing something like that. They would come up with huge opposition for that, because people now love whales. Right? So we need to change the conversation about sharks. We need people to think of sharks for what they really are, which is these totally awesome, really cool guardians of our oceans. Now, the best way that we can change the conversation about sharks is to spread knowledge and curiosity, not fear. All right, that's all I have for you guys. And so I think that we can take questions now. So for those of you who have some questions.
Please, if you have to go out now, leave quietly so people can hear the answers to questions, and then we'll adjourn in about 10 minutes.
All right, what's your question?
Why does a hammerhead shark have such a weird shaped overhead?
All right, so the question was, why do hammerhead sharks have such a weird flat head? All right, so hammerhead sharks have a weird flat head because their mouths need to be really, really close to their body because of the things that they eat. And they also, it spreads their eyes out so they have a totally different vision perception of what's going on in their world. Any other questions? The biggest shark that I've ever seen in person was a 15-foot tiger shark, and I will fully admit I was scared. What else? You have a question, bud?
Actually, a question, but this is how you could tell how strong sharks are. How smaller their gills are, how weak they are.
How weak they are? So you can tell how strong a shark is.
Gills are stronger.
So say that again.
How bigger the shark's gills are, is as
So the bigger the gills are, the stronger the shark is?
yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true, because it probably says something about how big the whole shark is in general, right? That has really big gills, it's probably a really big, powerful shark. Why are lemon sharks the only yellow shark? I actually have no idea. What do you think? Maybe it was just their favorite color. No? Probably not. What about you, bud?
Why do the sea turtles get infected?
Why do the sea turtles get infected? We actually don't know a lot about the virus. And the thing is that it's mostly affecting turtles in Hawaii, right? But it's also affecting a lot of different turtles, a lot of different species. But we don't know where the disease came from, and we don't actually know a lot about it. So you should grow up and be a sea turtle ecologist and figure it out.
Very nice stuff.
Have you ever touched a shark or were you too scared to touch it?
Have I ever touched a shark? Yes, I have touched a shark. So sometimes during our shark research, we actually have to catch sharks and we take things like blood samples from them and we take their length. And so that requires us to actually turn the shark over. We give it a little pet on the tummy. And the weird thing about sharks is when you turn them upside down, they get super disoriented and they just freeze. So if you're ever getting attacked by a shark, just flip it upside down. I'll come back to you.
Why are sharks as big as a house?
Why are sharks as big as a house? Well, I think it probably has to do with how they've become really big animals to eat really big organisms, right? And so some of these sharks eat things like seals and dolphins, which are truly huge animals. And so the shark has to be even bigger than the other things that they're eating because it has to fit in their mouth, right? So some of them have to be as big as a house. All right, I'll come back to you in a second.
What's the main reason for shark attacks?
What is the main reason for shark attacks? So this is a question that oftentimes gets me in trouble. So a lot of people say that sharks are confused and that they mistake you for a seal. I think that is just a stupid reason to say, right? You look like a really dumb fish that can't swim, okay? And you are sitting at the surface. You look like food and you are food, and that's why they attack people. The problem is that it's really just being in the wrong place at the wrong time in front of a hungry shark.
Do you know, are their brains alike to us?
Are their brains like what?
Like us.
Are their brains like us? So a shark's brain is not as developed as ours, okay? They actually can't see color very well. And sharks actually, a lot of people say they're not very intelligent animals. They're not like a dolphin, okay? But their brains look a lot like ours, but they don't act a lot like ours. Any others?
Did sharks evolve from any other organisms?
So sharks evolved from other jawed fishes. And so we've had a long history of evolution of sharks, and the oldest shark is about 486 million years old. And they've done a lot of different things. They've changed in a lot of different ways. And so one of the biggest sharks was the one that came just before great white, which was a megalodon shark, and it was double the size of a great white. Great whites get around 2,100 pounds and about 17 feet long. So it was a truly huge shark. How do sharks find food? Oh, how do they find you? How do sharks find you? Well, sharks actually can see kind of well, but they can't see color. So what they're actually looking for is something on the surface with a shadow. Sharks who are hungry stay close to the bottom or deep into water. And what they're doing is they're looking up, and all they're focusing on is what breaks the pattern of the sunlight, what looks like food.
When you catch a shark to take a blood sample, how do you catch it so you don't harm it?
So we actually catch them with hooks. We do. But the hooks aren't barbed, so it actually doesn't stick in the shark for very long. And we also go around in boats, and we're trying to find the sharks the second that they catch the hook. And the second that they catch the hook, we reel them in, we turn them over, and we take some samples. Now, we know that this seems invasive, but it doesn't seem to bother the sharks very much as long as we let them go quite quickly. So we try to be really efficient, but sometimes we have to touch the organisms in order to understand them. Do you have a question?
Can cookie-cutter sharks eat other sharks?
Can cookie-cutter sharks eat other sharks? Yes. And so one of the pictures that I almost put up, but it was too blurry, was a picture of a great white shark with a big old cookie-cutter mark right here. So these cookie-cutter sharks can even get the big ones.
If you were an 11-year-old boy living in a landlocked state like Utah, and you were really interested in sharks, what would you study in school, and how would you get there? How would you get to a place where you could be a marine biologist?
Okay, so the question was, if you were a landlocked child in Utah, how could you study sharks now, and then how would you get to a place to being a marine biologist? Okay, so there's tons of great books out there, and there's tons of great resources like Blue Planet, which helps people learn about sharks in really positive ways. Sometimes Discovery Channel has great shows on it, and sometimes they have shows that are meant to create fear in people about sharks. So if I were you, I would pick selectively what you watch on the Discovery Channel Shark Week and try to make sure that it's something that is knowledge building and not fear building.
So how about, one last question, and then we'll adjourn in here.
I don't know. You're jumping up and down. How do lantern sharks glow in the dark? They have bioluminescence. Remember when we talked about that? So bioluminescence is a type of bacteria that live with the shark. And those bacteria, when they move around a lot, they light up. And so that's how lantern sharks also light up. They have this nice, cozy relationship with bacteria, and they basically cause the bacteria to get agitated, and then they light up. All right.
Yeah, so if you have more questions, feel free to stay in here and come down and talk to Trish. And otherwise, go have fun in the halls, and thanks very much.